Charles Hibbler came through here on a vacation going to Siloam Springs, Arkansas, with his father. He just loved this location right here. When he came through Sulphur Springs area on the highway, he fell in love with it.
Okay.
I guess we still have it down here.
Oh, she's down there.
All right, there you go.
We'll spread out a little bit.
Okay.
I'm good.
Oh, she's got a notepad. Girl after my own heart.
When Mrs. Joyce Young asked me to be in on a project studying the history of Sulphur Springs, I was less than thrilled. After all, it's a small town, 671 people. What could possibly be interesting? When she organized a historical hayride with Lil Buckley, our local historian, as tour guide, I was one of the more skeptical. But as Mrs. Buckley explained about Sulphur's history, I found myself absolutely sucked in. There was so much I didn't know, and so much I wanted others to learn. Did you know that we were once called the beauty spot of the Ozarks? Or that we once had 11 hotels? Or that thousands of vacationers poured in for rest, recreation, and entertainment? I didn't. So when Mrs. Buckley asked us to help out with the Sulphur Springs Heritage Month project, we jumped at the chance to show the rest of the town what we'd seen and take you on our hayride experience. Our hope is that by returning to the past, we can inspire people here and now with a vision of prosperity for our town.
I got involved because I had done some research on the history of this town, and that's the very reason that I'm in this thing. I received a phone call that the homeschoolers were interested in this history of this town, and I was so thrilled to think about them wanting to know about our town. It's a beautiful town, and it has lots of promise. It has a rich history. So to take this tour was very exciting, and we had a glorious time. It was very good. I was just really thrilled to be able to show these young people all about our town and see them enthused about starting to work towards it prospering.
The land in northwest Arkansas was open for development in the early 1800s. Arkansas became a state in 1836, and it wasn't long before people began to venture west to settle there. In 1854, Zebulon Winery purchased several acres in northwest Arkansas and became an early settler. His cabin was a popular stopping place for travelers, and soon his little valley was known for the healing qualities of the waters there. In the early 1880s, William Hibbler and his son Charles came through this area, and the young Charles fell in love with the land. He settled here in 1884 and decided to lay out a town site. Soon after the building of the Park Hotel, we had a post office, a school, a store or two, and a bathhouse. We were a flourishing little town and had a great future before us.
It was where the first schoolhouse was in Sulphur Springs. Maud White was the teacher, and Maud White was a stepdaughter to the man who found the town of Sulphur Springs, Charles Hibbler. And she married J.B. Stevenson, who was the president of the Kansas City Railroad Company.
Is this the original part of the building?
No. It was a totally different building, and she has a picture there of the building. It was just a, country schoolhouse.
When Sulphur Springs was founded, Lake LaBalladine covered almost all of the park area and had a natural dam instead of a man-made one. When Dr. Bills drained the lake in 1888 and isolated the healing springs, the lake came back smaller. In the 1900s, a dock, a boathouse, and a diving board were built to encourage the tourists of Sulphur to kick back and relax and enjoy a day on the water. In Sulphur's heyday, the park was the scene of much entertainment and, of course, the healing springs. When an evangelist named John Brown bought the park in 1924, it greatly affected its popularity. A strongly religious man, Mr. Brown brought about some major changes. Mixed bathing and swimming was no longer allowed. The boys could come one day of the week, and the girls another. Dancing was banned, as well as alcohol. Since drinking and dancing were much of the entertainment back then, the lack of it discouraged people from enjoying the park.
What's that sound I hear like clear water running? I thought I heard the White River call. I had me a dream and it took this long to find it. Now I'm going back to Arkansas.
The lithium springs, located on the north end of the city park in Sulphur Springs, was very popular in the early 1900s. People came from afar because they wanted to drink that water. Lithium is used as a medication by a lot of doctors, psychologically soothing people and their nerves. Many people came and bottled the water and took it home with them. People would swear by the healing that they received from drinking that water.
There were 3 springs in the city park, and each one had its own purpose and effect. There was one spring of alkaline magnesia, one of white sulfur, and one of black sulfur. The city set up pumps over the various springs so that citizens and tourists could drink the waters according to their health needs. Alkaline magnesia is good for stomach problems, white sulfur for liver complaints, and black sulfur for malaria fever, according to the advertisements. Because there was so much healthy water in Sulphur, doctors often recommended that their patients come here for a relaxing holiday and to drink heartily of the springs. Not only could a questing patient find an aid to his ailment, but he also could find a good time with the many entertainments and pleasures that Sulphur had to offer. Now that the springs were a major draw, Sulphur citizens decided to capitalize on them. Several bathhouses were constructed, one such being the Berger Bathhouse, built by Frank and Anna Berger in 1926. Another such institution was the Philadelphian House, built in 1915. Ownership of this house was handed down to a succession of doctors, each of whom used it as a private residence and office until 1978, when a Dr. Busby purchased the Philadelphian House and turned it into a place of mental, spiritual, and physical healing. This lasted until 1985, when Philadelphian House was purchased by Byron Bristol. It is now Harbor House, a bed and breakfast.
Oh, yeah.
Charles Hibbler very fortunately married into the family of the president of the Kansas City Southern Railway. And because of that, he had inside access to get the railroad to come to Sulphur Springs. And he worked with them, and that's what happened. They came down here with the railroad, and then he worked with businessmen in Kansas City and got an excursion train to come down here to bring people from the city to Sulphur Springs for a happy weekend, relaxing away from the hubbub of the city. And so they came down here and they had to have places to stay, so hotels were built, businesses sprang up, people invested their money here, and soon it was a very, very thriving town. We had a lot going on. There were many people who came in here that were prominent people. Queen Wilhelmina was here, and there has been many of the presidents of the United States. There's been some of them here. There's been people who have ran for presidency here. And we had a man that liked to discover caves that came through here, and he discovered the Bluff Dwellers Cave, which is here on the edge of Sulphur Springs. And we had a lot going on here. They began to build little tabernacles and things in the park. They had entertainment for these people when they came here, and they drank the waters, and the waters became so famous that doctors from all over sent people here to take their baths for arthritis and for stomach problems and for soothing of the nerves. All of these things. There were many people that came here, and they went away testifying of how wonderful they felt because they had drank these waters or they had taken baths in these waters, and it was wonderful for them. Our town was even in encyclopedias, believe it or not. Sulphur Springs was in the encyclopedia back then. And so people learned about our town from all over the world.
Every town has its happening place for business, and for Sulphur, it was Spring Street. It was packed full of services and businesses like a general store, a furniture store, a drugstore, a filling station, a lumber yard, a grocery store and meat locker, a doctor's office, a bank, and 2 hotels. The Ozark Hotel, where the fire station is today, and the Oaklawn Hotel, where the Wee Pine Knot home now stands. You could even buy a car at the Johnson Ford Motor Company, which was located inside this very building. Whatever you needed, you could get it on Spring Street. Of course, this wasn't the only place with great things in Sulphur's heyday in the 1920s. One institution that brought sophistication and entertainment to Sulphur Springs was the Cox Building, built for Mr. Cox, an early investor in the town. It was used as an opera house on the top floor with businesses below. In later years, it was also a temporary post office while the new building was being built. Also, it was a temporary stand-in while they were constructing the new school, now known as the old school. There is still graffiti on the walls of this building where several students painted their names. Now that Sulphur Springs was a popular retreat, numerous hotels and boarding houses were built for the vast numbers of tourists and visitors that poured into the city every week. There was the Paul Hotel, located on the southeast corner of Patterson and Bush Streets, and it was owned by the mayor John P. Paul from 1902 to 1906. The Oaklawn, on the southeast corner of Duff and Spring Street, was 1 block from the railroad depot. When the Oaklawn burned, the home called Wee Pine Knot was built on the site and stands to this day. The Tourist Rest Hotel was on Spring Street west of the drugstore. There was the Fairlawn Boarding House on Hibbler Avenue just south of the new post office building and the Ozone Hotel on Bush Street. As a point of interest, the Ozone Hotel was dismantled during World War II and the materials from it hauled to Gravette to be sold during a lumber shortage. The Inside Inn was opened by Mr. and Mrs. Charlie Parker on the corner of Patterson and Hibbler Street. There was the Livingston Hotel, which used to be the Blomquist Sanitarium, and it had its own water system and electric lights. It became the Livingston in 1910 when Mr. J.M. Tague purchased it. For the times, the Kielburg Hotel was a marvel and the largest hotel in Arkansas. It had 5 stories and it was mostly made of limestone from a nearby quarry. It had an observation tower that was close to 100 feet tall and you could see 3 states from it. All 100 rooms came equipped with hot and cold running water, and 8 rooms on each floor had private baths and toilets. The Kielburg also had its own power plant to, get this, generate power for the electric elevators. The lobby floor had 70 rooms of its own, including a library, a business office, and a reception area. The basement came complete with a billiard hall, a gymnasium, a hairdresser, several Turkish mineral baths, and a ballroom. Many celebrities frequented this hotel, the most famous of them being Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands, Coin Harvey, who started Montenay, and J. Edgar Hoover, founder of the FBI. Who knows, one of them may have stood on this very balcony. Unfortunately, it wasn't meant to be. From its opening in 1909, the Kielburg seemed fated to fail. It lasted until 1913, after which it was taken over by owner after owner and renamed several times. In 1940, this beautiful building caught fire and the top 3 floors were destroyed. Now, the remains of this magnificent hotel are part of Shiloh community, a standing remnant of the Sulphur that once was. This building was one of 2 banks built in Sulphur Springs, Arkansas. It was also the site of the infamous bank robbery on June 11, 1925. Picture this, a warm, summer, sunshiny day. The town was bustling, people scurrying to and from various businesses, and Miss Clara Abercrombie headed out the door on her dinner break when the bank closed. Add to the scene an inconspicuous Model T pulling up a little bit north of Mr. Stout's grocery store. Rumors of a bank robbery had been floating about, and as Miss Clara passed two men coming from the Model T, she heard one of them say, "Just let her go." Lo and behold, the fearsome Birchfield gang, led by John Birchfield, had come to town. Miss Clara ran straight away to Stout's grocery store to inform Mr. Stout, the bank president, that the bank was being robbed. Meanwhile, two members of the Birchfield gang were cleaning out the vault, while the other two waited in the car, hoping for a quick, clean getaway. When Mr. Stout heard of the ongoing bank robbery, he grabbed his 12-gauge and headed out the door, intent on saving the bank's money. Unfortunately, he was wounded in the ensuing shootout, and his shots hit low, only managing to cripple the car a little bit. However, John Birchfield and another member of the gang, Boyd Jewell, were injured and captured later that night. The other two gang members, Tyrus Clark and Elva McDonald, were captured at least 3 days after the robbery by an assembled posse. Sadly, this entire affair was not as cut and dried as it sounds. Mr. Stout died of the injuries inflicted by the gang shots. Over 1,000 people attended his funeral, including most of the bankers from the surrounding areas. His death was a crippling blow to Sulphur Springs. All this for $933.
In the early 20s, John Brown came here. He purchased the old Kilberg Hotel, and he had a military academy there and marched the kids down through the park. He also set up a camp that he called Camp Buddy, and it was out on the west side of town. But he had a school here for many years, and anybody could come and go to this school. It didn't have to just be people that wanted to be a military academy. He got the Wycliffe Company to come here, who were Bible translators, and they began out on Breezy Point, and then they purchased the old Kilberg Hotel, and they then were there for a few years and did their translations there. Had the missionary children there. They schooled them and kept them there while the missionaries were out learning the different languages to translate. When Wycliffe was here, they made an invitation to Billy Graham to come here and hold a revival. He was in the park with his revival, and there were probably 2,000 or 3,000 people that came to hear Billy Graham here in this park, and that was in the 40s. Highway 71 was changed to Highway 59, and the traffic began to go another direction, so there wasn't as much traffic coming through here. The springs were no longer being used for health because we have a pharmaceutical companies that have developed enough drugs to take care of the pains and aches of people, so they don't have to take baths and drink waters anymore. And our town has kind of deteriorated, but I believe with interest that is flaming up now, we're going to begin to prosper again, and it's beginning to grow again, and we are going to become a nice, thriving little community, which is what we want.
It is our hope that in showing you our past, we have inspired you for Sulphur's future. Our town still has the great beauty that made it so popular back in its heyday. In the face of this fact, we can ask ourselves only one question. What happened? We could still be the beauty spot of the Ozarks, the retreat center of the Midwest. So will we fight to uphold the visions of those who came before? Or will we sit back and watch as the ghosts of our glorious past fade away?
I've laid my head, and many places I've yet to see. But of all the places I've ever been, Arkansas is where I want to be. What's that sound I hear like clear water running? I thought I heard the White River call. I had me a dream and it took this long to find it. Now I'm going back to Arkansas. I'm going home.